Welcome to Fear Street.
I've always believed in ghosts and the supernatural. Back in the mid-'80s, I was pretty miserable. My parents had died and I was kind of lost. I spent a lot of my time with my old friend from high school, Scotty. Scotty had a girlfriend named Shelley, and she was all into the occult and Wicca and stuff like that. They both lived in a basement apartment with two other girls. One of the girls, Chris, told me once that the apartment was haunted by a ghost named Phil, but he was powerless to do anything. I don't know where she got this information, but being young, kind of crazy, and daring, Scotty and I went out and bought a Ouija board. We thought it'd be fun and both shared an interest in the occult. Before we used the board, we waited for Shelley to come home from work. I brought another friend with me, Sid. Sid and I had known each other since we were kids. He had known Scotty a little, but he had never met Shelley. Well, we were all set to use the Ouija, but none of us, except for Shelley, was serious. Scotty and I decided to make a quick run to the liquor store for some beer, and we left Sid and Shelley in the apartment. No one else was there but them. We couldn't have been gone for more than 20 minutes, probably less. But when we walked in, Sid was visibly shaken. He drank a beer in one gulp when I handed him one and told me, "I'm leaving, man. There's some freaky stuff going on here." I asked him what he was talking about. Apparently, Shelley and him had tried the Ouija board, and Sid, believing that Shelley was pushing the planchette, took his hands off of it and asked what his parents' names were. According to Sid and Shelley, the Ouija spelled it out. I could definitely see how that would shake Sid up. His parents had been dead for years, at least 10 years before he had even met Scotty. And trust me, Scotty never knew Sid's parents' names. There's no way Shelley could have known. Sid left, and Scotty and I decided to screw around with the Ouija board. Phil, or so the board said, made an appearance. Each of us thinking that the other was playing a joke, we taunted the spirit. After a while, we got bored and stopped. I left the board at Scotty's and went home. The next evening, I was over at Scotty's again. Shelley and the other girls had gone out, and one of our old buddies, a guy named Bill, came over. Bill was pretty cool. He had long red hair and dressed like a hippie, but he wasn't into drugs or anything like that. Anyway, Scotty went to the store for a six-pack and a video so we could all just relax and hang out. While he was gone, Bill and I decided to sit at the kitchen table and mess with the Ouija board. Once again, Phil showed up. When Bill and I both accused each other of moving the planchette, Phil spelled out, "Watch the cat." Shelley's cat was asleep on a rug, not 6 feet away from us. Suddenly, the cat woke up, like someone had poked it. It started hissing at something we didn't see, but the cat definitely acted like something was in front of it. Then it started running around like it was being chased and disappeared into one of the bedrooms. I looked at Bill and he had turned white as a sheet. Without warning, he bolted for the front door at top speed. He ran into Scotty, who was just getting back, and practically knocked him over on his way out. I don't know why Bill was so scared and I wasn't. I mean, I was shaken a little, but I wasn't frightened that much by what had happened. Bill wouldn't come back inside, so Scotty and I sat outside the building with him for a while and talked until it got late. Then Bill and I went home. But Scotty and I were and probably still are hardheads. I went back to Scotty's a few nights later and he and I messed with the Ouija board again. This time, Phil took on a nasty tone, saying he was going to get us and how he was really evil. We made jokes, messing with him, and basically told him that we'd kick his butt. It got really late, and everyone else had gone to bed. I had a few beers with Scotty, so he told me it was okay if I slept over, since he didn't think I should be driving home. Lucky for me, Scotty had an extra bed in his and Shelley's room, separated by a partition. I accepted, but that night I had the weirdest dream. I dreamt that the streetlights right outside the window kept flashing on and off, and something was lurking right outside the building, every so often whispering my name. The next morning I told Scotty about it over breakfast. I figured it was only a dream. We'd been messing around with the Ouija board, so a weird dream wasn't strange. But as I told Scotty, he had this look on his face like he had just heard something unbelievable. Scotty told me and he looked completely serious. "Mick, I had the same dream. Only the lights inside kept flashing and something in the hallway was calling my name." I laughed. Scotty was a big joker and sometimes he likes to try to scare me, so I figured he was kidding. I still don't know if he was or not. We decided to settle the does the Ouija work or not theory once and for all. That night, Scotty, Shelley, and Bill's older brother Rob drove way out to a little cemetery. This cemetery is probably 100 or so years old, maybe older, and it's so far into the woods, I didn't know it was there, and I'd lived around the area my whole life. Our thought was that if ghosts are real, that's where we would find one. Hey, I never said we were smart. There was a low wall around the cemetery about 3 feet high. The only other structure within sight was a small church. I don't know if it was abandoned or not. It was about 10 p.m. and dark. Plus the place was in the middle of the boonies and surrounded by trees. I had a flashlight, and so did Rob. Rob was visibly scared. We always gave him a hard time about being a chicken, so I think he came with us only to prove he wasn't a scaredy cat. Scotty had a small pin light and some candles. He started lighting them and putting the Ouija board in front of one of the tombstones. Shelley, Rob, and I were looking at tombstones, trying to read some of the worn writing on them. None of us had been watching Scotty for a few minutes. Suddenly, he shouted, "Let's get the hell out of here!" He threw everything together and started running full speed for the car. He kept yelling, "Come on, let's go!" We all chased after him. I think if Scotty had the keys to the car, he would have left us. But it was Rob's car. We all jumped in and Scotty kept urging Rob to floor it. Rob, who was, as I said, kind of a scaredy cat, complied and we sped away. I asked Scotty why he'd freaked out. Did he see a caretaker or maybe a cop around? Scotty just kept saying, "I don't want to talk about it." To this day, I don't know what happened. Though over the years I've asked Scotty about that night, but he won't say anything. Now, there's a big chance that Scotty was just playing a prank to scare the rest of us. I don't know. I only know that's a long way for him to go for a joke, and after 10 or so years, you'd think he would have told me. Plus, he did seem scared as we drove away, and Scotty didn't scare easily. He was always brave as long as I've known him. Well, after that, I took the Ouija board home with me. It was technically mine anyway. I lived in my grandparents' old house at the time, and my only company there was my dog, Nico. I'll admit, I was lonely. A dog is great company, but they can't talk. I missed my parents and grandparents, and I felt completely alone in the world. So I foolishly started playing around with the Ouija board again. I met a spirit that said she was Beth Easton. She claimed to be a young 20-something girl that had been killed in a car wreck not far from where I lived. She even gave a location. I didn't really know if I was communicating with something or whether my involuntary muscle movements and subconscious were doing it. Still, I spoke with Beth almost every night. One night, she said she'd write to me if I got some paper. I tried it. I think they call it automatic writing. I'm gonna tell you this. I know I didn't purposely write anything on the pad I had, yet my hand started writing. It scared the crap out of me because I think for the first time I thought, oh crap, this is for real. But being a hardhead, I still used the Ouija. Beth said she really liked me and felt sorry for me being alone most of the time. She said via the board that she was going to visit me soon. I was still skeptical, but a little scared. The night she said she would visit me, I went to bed around 11 p.m. My dog Nico curled up on the foot of the bed, like she did every night. I fell asleep quickly, but I was awakened all of a sudden. I remember looking at my clock and it was around 4 a.m. The room was very dark, and I couldn't figure out why I'd woken up so suddenly, especially at 4 a.m. I was a deep sleeper back then. I noticed that Nico was gone, which was strange. Nico hardly ever left the bedroom until I did in the morning. I thought to myself, she probably just went downstairs to her water dish. Then it happened, and I swear I'm not making this up. Something plopped into the bed. It felt as if someone had just laid down next to me. I swear, I even heard the spring squeak under the weight. After hearing that noise, I didn't move at all. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling. At that moment, I kept trying to figure out if it was my imagination or whether I really had felt that. I was certain I was wide awake though, because I thought about calling for Nico. But I was scared and I didn't make a sound. I just listened. Man, I swear to this day, I could hear the sound of light breathing, like a female, right next to me. Why would a ghost breathe? I don't know. Then, and I'm not kidding, something touched me on my chest, like a hand from a female when she snuggles up to you in bed. I didn't even look, I just jumped out of the bed screaming. Poor Nico was downstairs laying on the floor when I came tearing down the stairs screaming, which makes it even weirder because Nico never left my side at night except for this one time. I turned on every single light in the house and waited for sunrise since I was scared out of my mind. Nevertheless, I went to work that next day and stopped over at Scotty's on my way home. I told him about what had happened. He laughed like he didn't believe me. He kept saying, "Mick, you were dreaming." I couldn't believe that Scotty, of all people, didn't believe me. I went home and pulled the Ouija out. I was desperate to find out if I was going crazy or not. So I guess asking the Ouija wasn't the wisest course of action, but I said it before. I never claimed to have been smart. The Ouija spelled out a message from Beth that boiled down to, "Why do you run away from me? I came to sleep with you. I love you, and I'll be back tonight." Now, I was terrified. I figured I either had a horny ghost on my hands or I was going nuts. My best friend didn't even believe me. Sid definitely wouldn't if I were to tell him about it. It was just me and my dog. So I did what any other guy in my position would have done. I slept on the couch with the lights on. Moreover, I wasn't going upstairs for anything. I even got my change of clothes for work and all that before the sun went down. Whether it was my imagination or not, for some reason, the second floor of my house took on an eerie feel. I was uncomfortable up there, even when it was daytime, and I'd lived in that house my entire life. One night went by and nothing happened, but I was still scared. The second floor just seemed to be oozing with a presence. The next night, however, I dreamed quite clearly that I was standing at the bottom of the staircase. A voice kept calling me upstairs, but I couldn't see anyone. There was just this disembodied voice calling my name, and the stairs looked like they went up 100 feet. In the dream, I was compelled to go to the bedroom and see what was calling me, but I was too scared. I woke up screaming. It was the first time in my life that I ever woke up screaming like a guy in a horror film. I was sweating and shaking. The next morning, I didn't go to work, and thankfully, Scotty and Shelly didn't either. I told them what had happened. Shelly believed me, and Scotty seemed to be convinced that I wasn't making it up. Being into witchcraft and stuff, Shelly came to my house and took the Ouija. She said she was going to get rid of it for me. Then she used some candles, incense, and her spooky mumbo jumbo and went around my house, cleansing it. I didn't really believe in all of her magic stuff, but even as a placebo, it helped me calm down. It seemed to have worked too. Nico would go upstairs again, I could sleep in my room, and I felt better, as in not scared out of my wits. I haven't touched a Ouija since. When I was 12 years old, my parents divorced, and I went to live with my mother. We moved into an old Victorian house, which my mother rented temporarily until we found something better. For the first couple of days after we moved in, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But at night, I had trouble sleeping. When I did manage to fall asleep, I'd have terrifying and disturbing nightmares. I'd always wake up in a cold sweat, but I could never remember what the dreams were about. I started feeling a little paranoid. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of dark shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. I just shrugged it off as being due to my overactive imagination. One day, when my mother and I were cleaning out the attic, I came across something very strange. Tucked away in a corner, I discovered a Ouija board, some candles, and a small black book with weird Gothic lettering inside. When I showed them to my mom, her face went pale. She immediately gathered them all up, took them outside, and threw them in the trash. I tried to ask her what they were, but she refused to speak about it. The next day, she went shopping, and when she came back, she had a present for me. It was a necklace with a pendant in the shape of a gold cross. She had also bought a matching necklace for herself. At that time, I wasn't very religious, but I wore it just to please her. I had a friend named Maddie, and we decided to have a sleepover at my house. My mother was going to visit relatives, so we'd be on our own for the night. I wasn't worried because Maddie was rarely afraid of anything, so she always made me feel safe. We watched some horror movies, and shortly before midnight, we decided to go to bed. The two of us laid in bed, chatting for a while, and eventually we fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange sound. It was a low, growling noise. I woke Maddie up, and she said that she could hear it too. Gradually, it grew louder until it sounded like an intense humming of evil. Wondering what it was, we slid out of bed, opened the bedroom door, and peered out. What we saw was a dark shadow slowly moving up the stairs. Everything about it was just pure black. It almost blended in with the other shadows, but it was much darker. My first instinct was to run, but I couldn't move. Fear had me rooted to the spot. When it reached the top of the stairs, the dark mass just stood there with its head bowed and shoulders slumped. Its whole silhouette seemed fuzzy and indistinct around the edges. It had no face to look at, just a heavy black outline of something that looked vaguely human. Slowly, it turned to face us, and all I saw were deep red eyes staring at me. It was as if it was looking straight through us. It had something that looked like a mouth and seemed to smile at us with a malicious grin. I looked at Maddie, and she looked back at me. I'll never forget the look of terror on her face. The next moment, I felt my body tighten up in fear, but I couldn't remove my hand from the doorknob. The dark shadow just kept leering at us as it slowly approached. I saw it reach out with one of its hands, and I screamed, but I couldn't really move. As it came closer, I felt like I was being choked, and then I remember my eyes closing like I was fainting. I reached up and pulled my collar aside, exposing the gold cross around my neck. The shadow seemed to stop in its tracks. Maddie suddenly grabbed me and pulled me back as she slammed the door. We piled up furniture against the door and waited. All we could hear was an eerie silence. I was shaking so hard that Maddie actually had to hold me to get me to calm down. We were so freaked out that we just sat there behind the pile of furniture and held on to my gold cross for dear life. We stayed awake all night, too terrified to close our eyes. As the morning light began shining through the window, my nerves were so shot and I was so exhausted that eventually I passed out. I awoke a few hours later when my mother came home. We opened the door and looked out into the hallway. There was nothing there, but we could see what seemed like vague, dusty footprints where the dark mass had been. I told my mother all about what happened. The next day, we moved out and stayed in a motel until we could find another house. I'm 18 now, and I still think about this incident all the time. I know that was a demon we saw that night. It was too dark and felt too evil to be anything else. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, me and a friend were home alone on Halloween night because my brother was supposed to watch us, but instead he went to a concert and paid each of us $10 to not tell anyone. So we used the money to order pizza and watch scary movies on cable. One of the movies was about a Ouija board that summoned an evil spirit, and my friend said, "You can't really do that." However, I knew that my brother had a Milton Bradley one in his closet, so I went and got it. We lit a candle and put our hands on the planchette, asking if there were any spirits. At first, I admit I was moving it, and to my friend, it was pretty obvious, but after a while of messing around, we both got distracted, goofing off, and the next thing I know, it starts moving by itself. Now, I know most people will say it's like subconscious motor functions and whatnot, but I was barely touching it, and we were both blaming each other, saying it was a trick. I basically did all the talking and asked it what its name was. It said its name was David, and I asked how he died. He said he had drowned. I was like, okay, my friend is doing this and using the movie plot. So I said, if you're really a ghost, prove it. Do something to let us know you're real. Suddenly, the flame on the candle flickered and both of our fingertips began to get hot. Hot enough that it was like grabbing a fresh piece of bread out of a toaster, but not hot enough to really cause damage. We both took our hands off of it and ran freaked out into my room. So then my brother comes home from his concert and asks why his board was out. He proceeds to yell at me for messing with his stuff, but all his friends were like, no, it's cool. Leave it out so we can play with it. So me and my friend sat back and watched, and as it started to move, it was the same thing. Who are you? David. How did you die? I drowned. Prove that you're real. Nothing happened. So my brother's final question was, okay, if you're a ghost, tell me the exact time that my parents will walk through that door when they come home. For a little bit, nothing happened. Then it started to spell out 12:01. We all looked up at the clock to see what time it was, and it had just struck midnight. We heard car doors slamming outside and footsteps coming up the stairs. Our eyes must have been as big as plates. No one was breathing. I heard my mom and dad giggling because they were tipsy. His keys jiggled in the lock. Wrong one. The seconds are ticking away on the clock. The key goes into the door. The handle turns. We hear the sound of one of my mom's high heels drop down a couple of steps, and she and my dad laugh while he goes and gets it, leaving the keys in the door. The hand keeps moving on the clock. They mumble a few words to each other about playing it cool, and they walk through the door, literally exactly at 12:01. We were all like, hell no. And we all got up and left the board in the middle of the floor and ran into my brother's room.